So, thank you. Hello, everybody. So, as Christina said, I'm working in an aerodynamic lab, so I'm a physicist. And more especially, I work on sports physics. And maybe you don't see the link with this day, the subject of the day. But in fact, sports physics is an approach we develop, the experimental science approach we apply to sport. And it can focus on different subjects, physical subjects like aerodynamics, elasticity, friction, and so on. But the subject I will talk today is biomechanics, and particularly the physics of muscle. And all this work is done with Christophe Clanet at École Polytechnique. And 2 years ago, almost, we met Vance. I met Vance, and Amine and Laura and all the team. And we speak about these studies of muscle and say we should interact. And I'm sorry, I don't know much about electrostimulation, but the purpose is to learn, to interact, and I will present what we have done, and I hope it will entrain discussions. So the motivation of our study was to understand force records. So here you can see the strongest man of the world, Hossein Rezazadeh from Iran, and he's doing weightlifting sports. So in weightlifting there is two trials, the snatch and the clean and jerk. So in both cases you have to raise a barbell, which is on the ground, above your arms. And for the snatch is one movement thing, and for the clean and jerk you have a rest at the shoulders. And in this not experiment, in this sport, he is able to lift 210 kilograms in snatch and 263 kilograms in clean and jerk, so more. And the idea of sports physics is to see simply if we can find some laws. Yeah. And to do that, we collect all the records and plot on this curve the maximal mass athletes are able to lift depending on their own mass. Okay, and you can see here for the square are the clean and jerk, the circle are the snatch, and in red it's men and in blue women. So you can see that there is a trend. The maximal mass you are able to lift increase with your own mass, and this kind of law we can simply understand it. And the argument we have to appeal is that the maximal force you are able to develop is proportional to the section of the muscle. And we will come back on this argument later, but if you trust me, we can say that the maximal force is proportional to the mass of the person to the power 2/3. And if you say that the maximal force you develop is equal to the mass you lift, so the mass of the barbell plus your own mass when you rise, you have this relation, this scaling law, which link the mass you lift, your own mass, and your own mass. And if you plot that, you can see in a log-log diagram, you plot the mass you lift depending on your own mass, and you can see that you align the dot on the 2/3 line, which corresponds to a scaling law. So it's a very simple argument, but we can say some things about records. And if we go deeper with this equation, what we can write is what is the maximal mass of the barbell you can lift depending on your own mass. You can have this curve, this blue curve, and here on this curve you will find the strongest man, Hossein Rezazadeh, at the maximal of the curve. and the heaviest man, the man which is able to lift only his own weight and no barbell. So it's an American, it's John Brunner Minnock, who weighted 635 kilograms. And from this equation, you can derive the ratio of the heaviest man on the strongest man. And this ratio is about 3.4. And if you do the ratio of the mass of this man on this man, it's 3.3. So it's an illustration of what we can say about scaling laws. And another example is if we now look at the adimensional ratio of the mass, you can see that this ratio depends on the mass to the power minus 1/3. And this seems to favorize small organisms like ants, which are able to lift up to 5,000 times their own mass. And so maybe we can reset the strongest man definition. Is it the man which is able to lift the highest mass here? Or is it the man who is able to lift the highest ratio? In fact, here you can see that only the lightest one is able to lift 3 times his own mass. So I don't know. So to go further in the muscle working, what we did is to look at the snatch dynamic. So here is Nordin, which lift a barbell. And what we tried to learn is what is his strategy. And here, I don't know if you see that on the movie, but you can maybe see it easily on this chronophotography. You can see that Nordin lifts the barbell, and here, at this point, there is a violent change. He passes his body below the barbell, and bend his body, and straight it again. So what it does mean is he prefers use twice his legs, his muscle of the legs, rather than his legs and his arm. In this experiment, he never used the muscle of his arm. And why? Because the section of his arm is lower than the section of his legs muscles. So, but it was only to illustrate what we will do, but to do experiment, we are lazy, so we take the simplest gesture as possible. So here is a bench press experiment with Michael, who lifts 70 kilogram barbell. And you can see the kind of experiment he can do. So I will do it again. So at the top, is asked to lift the barbell in the more explosive way possible, so the maximum velocity possible. And we record the velocity of the barbell depending on time. And we do that for barbell from 10 kilogram mass to the maximal mass is able to lift. And that are the curves you can see here. In red is 10 kilograms, and blue the heaviest barbell. And what we found interesting in these curves is their shapes. For smallest mass, you can see the shape are rather symmetric, but as the mass increase, the velocity decrease, of course, the time of lift increase, of course. But what is interesting is the shape, and particularly the shape of the bump, the first bump here, which appear for heaviest mass. And that these experimental trends we will try to understand with a physical model, mechanical model. So the first thing to do is to model the joint, to lift the barbell. The weightlifter has to straight his arms, and we can do that mechanically, and we get an equation differential with inertial term on the left and the weight and the force of the muscles. And then the question is, what is the force of the muscle? Here, the articulation is straightened by a contracting muscle. And the first naive hypothesis is to take a constant force, the maximal force you're able to lift. And if you do so, you can compute the experimental curves of the speed depending on time with this equation, and we find curves like that. So the general trend is good, but you never recover the same shape, the same initial shape. And all the information seems to be there. But the hypothesis of a constant force is very naive. So we come back with more common hypothesis, which is to use the Hill relationship, which link the velocity of contraction to the force. And as you may know, you develop your maximal speed at zero force, and you are able to exert your maximal force at zero speed. So, in fact, you can describe this as an hyperbolic curve, and it has been phenomenologically described by Hill, and we can get this expression. And if we do so, we can integrate numerically the model, and we obtain this result. So the curves are better, but we can see that the beginning of the curve is still not good. So to really better understand this experimental curve, what we have to do is to look at how physiologically the muscle contracts. And to do so, we can say that the muscle is composed of a series of parallel fibers, each composed of parallel myofibrils. And if you take a myofibrils, you can cut it in its length in a basic unit, the sarcomere, which is 3 micrometers long and 1 micrometer of diameter, and which is the basic unit among all vertebrate muscles. And inside this sarcomere, you have again fibers, which are myosin and actin protein. And you can see on this movie how the muscle contracts.
A sarcomere contracts when its actin filaments slide past its myosin filaments. Contraction shortens the sarcomere, but does not change the length of the actin or myosin filaments. The myosin filaments have heads that bind and pull actin repeatedly, shortening the sarcomere.
So I don't know if you heard the movie, but in fact the motor of the muscle contraction are the myosin head here, which will attach to the actin and pull the actin filaments. And the contraction of muscle is obtained because the networks of filaments are sliding along each other due to this force. And the challenge was to try to model this sliding filament proved by Huxley in '54. What we did is to find this man, Deshayevsky, who did a very good model of this contraction, but was completely forgotten. So the basic idea is that it considers the myosin head in 3 states. Either free, it doesn't interact with actin, or attached to actin and pulling, or attached to pulling and to actin, and not pulling, so a passive state. And the good idea was to say that you have a lot of myosin heads, so you can define a population in each state, and you can define constant time, τ1, τ2, and L over V, the transition constant of between each state. And here, L over V is the characteristic time obtained by the ratio of the length of action, the length of the myosin head divided by the speed of contraction. And doing that, you can define the equation, the differential equation, which will give the proportion of each head in each state. And moreover, you can define the force exerted by the sarcomere. And this force will be equal to the number of active heads times the force exerted by one head minus the force of passive head you have to detach. So it is the force exerted by one sarcomere. And you can then associate all the sarcomere to reconstruct, to rebuild the muscle in a wall. So what you do to build a fiber is you put all the sarcomere along each other, and you have a number of sarcomere which is a ratio of the length of the fiber divided by the length of the sarcomere. And along this fiber, the force is conserved, and the speed of the fiber is the speed of a sarcomere multiplied by the number of sarcomere. And you can do the same for the wall muscle. You associate all the fiber in parallel, and so you have the force, which is the force of one fiber multiplied by the number of fiber parallel, and the speed is conserved. So doing that, you understand that the maximal force is proportional to the section of the muscle, because the number of fiber parallel is equal to the section of the muscle divided by the section of a fiber, and the section of a fiber is constant among all the human beings. So then you can put this equation in the model and integrate it. So it's enough for the map. And what you can see is that the results are better. We are able to recover the same kind of beginning, the same maximal bump at the beginning, and that we are doing that with parameters which are the time constant, here and here. And what is interesting is these curves are obtained for Michael, which was a handballer, which is an explosive sport man. And we did the same for Greg, which is a typical weightlifter, which is very endurant and is able to lift 230 kilograms. And you can see that the shape, the global shape is the same, but the deformation at high mass are different. The shape are more rectangular than triangular before. And by changing the parameter, and especially this one, G, you can recover the same kind of curves. And what is interesting, in our opinion, is that we make the link between the macroscopic movement and the physiology of the muscle. And what I was saying about explosive sport versus endurance one is that we are thinking that just by recording the dynamic of a movement, we are able to say the proportion of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers. And that is something we are calibrating. We are doing that with runners and with the quadriceps muscles, because it's easier. With another experiment, the press leg experiment. And you can see on this graph, the velocity depending time, that if you plot the maximal mass curve, so the blue one previously, this one, for a different type of runner, which are specialized to 200 meters sprinter to 10 kilometer runners, you can see that the signal spread like a spectrum of what you can have as a proportion of fibers. So we think that it could be an interesting tool to determine without a biopsy, and very easily, because it takes less than 1 hour experiment, which is a kind of training, the proportion of fibers and how it can evolve during time with your training or lack of training. And the next step we are trying to develop is to explore the other parameter. For this fast twitch, slow twitch fiber, we only vary the parameter G, but there is other, tau1 and tau2, and if we do that theoretically, we see that we can see some oscillation, and this oscillation we are trying to understand that. And particularly, we worked with Loïc Auvray, a friend who had an amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and we did the same experiment, the bench press experiment, with barbell, light barbells, and you can see that the signals are completely different. You can see that all the peaks are concentrated at the beginning, and you can see there are some oscillation. So the fact is, we don't understand at all these curves, but we try to work on it, and especially on the oscillation. And that's why we do we are trying to do other experiments, which are rather isometric contraction, to investigate this oscillation. And here it's a knee leg extension, like presenters present this morning. So the idea is your leg is fixed to a rigid arm, and you push at a constant force, and you can do it voluntary or with electrical stimulation. And you can see here the torque exerted on the knee, depending of time. Here for the voluntary contraction at 25% and 50% of the maximal force you are able to exert. And you can see you are able to maintain a constant level of force, but with oscillation again. And if you look at the same signal stimulated, you see that there's no oscillation, but the level decreases, even if the target, the consigne, is the same. So it's not... From this experiment, what we can see is that for surface stimulation, of course, you stimulate always the same fibers, so you can see that you see fatigue. And what is to learn is how the control system, the nervous system, and all the body succeed in maintaining the same force. And of course, there is a lot of possible explanation of this oscillation, and we are trying to develop experiments to isolate all this cause. And another point we are working on is the fatigue you develop doing this isometric contraction. And here, what we did is to maintain a mass in the end and look at the heat you dissipate. So here you can see that thermic images we get. So the red color is hot and blue is cold. And you can see that the first experiment we did and the variation of temperature you can have between the arm which is working and the other arm. And this kind of thing we are working on. It's only the preliminary experiment, but the idea is to calibrate the heat dissipation and to be able to say if you don't have the information of if your muscle is tired or not, can you have a kind of sensor, which is a thermic one, which will tell you if you have still battery or not. So, and So, and from it, I have two examples in sport where you can see the same problem of muscle production, muscle force production and synchronization. So first one is rugby, and this question was asked by the French national DTN Didier Rottière, and he asked why 150 plus 150 equal 200, and he was speaking about the force exerted by the men in the scrum. And you can see experiment we perform in Marcoussis, and you can see for one man pushing on the force sensor is able to push 1060 newtons, and if you put 3, then 5, then 8 men, you see you don't have the number of men times the individual force. At each time you lost, and for the total scrum, you lost almost the half of the force. And the idea is to understand why, and the phenomenon is the same for tug of war. And if you have one man, you have one force, and if you have 8 men, you don't have 8 times the same force. You lost almost 50%. And the idea, it was interpreted as social laziness, as if you were a lot, you don't have the same eager to perform than if you are alone. But we don't really know, we don't really trust this hypothesis. So what we did is to look at the problem of synchronization. And if you look at the force developed by the scrum depending of time, you can see here there are oscillations. And these oscillations are due to the fact that all the people don't push at the same time. And to investigate that, we use a tool which is developed for, and very known for fluid mechanics. It's particle image velocimetry, where you divide the image in a little square, and you look at the correlation between the image and the next image. And here you can see in green some arrows that describe to be rough the displacement, the velocity of each point. And you can see that the color is not homogeneous, and it means that each people doesn't push at the same time. And from this kind of analysis, we do the same for the experiment on the force sensor. Above you have the force depending of time with oscillation, and below you have the mean velocity measured with this method depending of time. And you can see you have the same kind of oscillation, and what we try to understand now is why we have this oscillation and how to avoid it. And if I have and I will conclude by that. So here you can see the movie where you can see the displacement of each man. And the hope we have is that we can say something about muscle with this approach, because in fact you can it's Vogel that describes the sliding of actin along myosin at tug of war, and the idea is it possible to do a PIV analysis on the movie like that of contraction of fibers, and see if from inhomogeneity of and desynchronization of contraction you can explain some loss of efficiency in the muscle. So I have something about control and archery, but I think I will thank you with that.